While both Ozzy Osbourne and his life mate slash handler slash manager wife Sharon have had illustrious careers, the sun is beginning to set on the icon. But even in their golden years, they've adopted social media and alternative platforms like podcasting. It's allowed an even closer look into the lives and personalities of the Osbournes, far and beyond even their hit reality TV show, and further fleshes out the history of the Prince of Darkness with awesome stories. Stories like the time Ozzy asked film icon and monolithic comedian Robin Williams to assist him in raising Sharon's spirits as she battled cancer. And while she would ultimately win that battle, her morale at the time was low, leading to Ozzy employing the presence of one of comedy's best to visit her at their home, crawling into bed with her and telling her jokes in a display of empathy that really hits that wholesome note. The world lost Robin Williams in 2014, tragically by his own hand, but stories like this one are not unique, making it all the more heartbreaking. The Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is almost entirely worthless. From disrespectful snubs to confusing inductions, the institution hardly represents the mind of the average rock music fan, at least in my opinion. But it still sparks conversations over who should be inducted in the modern day, with icons like Dave Mustaine recently being queried about his aspirations to be included in the cluster. He expressed in what I read as an unhappy tone that he's basically already in there with Metallica's 2009 induction, though he was the only major member of the band not listed, likely due to him simply appearing in credits and being absent from the band's official personnel list. It did make me wonder if he's deserving of the induction purely based on his Metallica contributions. Certainly with the standout and legendary career he went on to forge with himself and Megadeth, it does feel quite overdue, adding Mustaine to a list of snubs that have been causing arguments for decades. The best cover band in all of heavy metal is and has been none other than Metallica. Whether it's their early worship of new wave of British heavy metal hitters or their honoring of punk icons like the Misfits, they've been putting down versions of other people's songs arguably better than the original works. They would use this talent to introduce Jason Newsted to the fans in the aftermath of Cliff Burton's passing, and later on would compile all of their covers, add a few more great ones, and gift the Metallica masses Garage Incorporated in the late 90s while they were well and established as metal's biggest act. All of this is to say that I desperately want them to do Garaging 2 before the sun sets on one of the most important careers in music history. However you felt about 72 seasons, James Hetfield and the rest of the band sound solid, and everything I've seen from the M72 World Tour shows me how absolutely informed the band is. Let this video be the official petition for a new Garage Inc. and tell the Metallica social media guy to pass the message along to the powers that be. The early 90s saw heavy metal staples like Ozzy Osbourne releasing hitters like No More Tears. The man himself, Lemmy, would contribute an abundance of lyrical and compositional work on Ozzy's first record of the decade, all while gearing up for Motorhead's next installment of the 1990s with their 10th studio record, March or Die. That album would see a slew of turbulence and triumph, with Golden Age drummer Filthy Animal Taylor being fired early in the process, as well as monster collaborations, seeing Lemmy's rendition of Hellraiser and Ozzy Osbourne returning the favors with an appearance on I Ain't No Nice Guy. The latter track would feature an awesome cheeseball music video with a bearded Prince of Darkness and a guitar solo performed by Guns N' Roses legend Slash right in the middle of GNR's Fiery Rain on top of the mountain. Between the two, Ozzy Osbourne and Lemmy would kind of perfectly transition into the 90s with their close work together, resulting in albums that many fans feel were their last true greats. A young metal-headed Matt Heafy would step onto a stage at a high school talent show in 1999 and perform a cover of Metallica's No Leaf Clover. It would begin an impressive career with Trivium, seeing them continue on to some of the biggest stages in rock and metal while they were still in their teenage years. After stepping into the studio for the band's first professionally produced freshman record, Ember to Inferno, they would catch the eyes and ears of Roadrunner Records, formally kicking off the band's big break in 2002. Their sophomore release, Ascendancy, would chart on the Billboard 100, opening up opportunities for Heafy and the rest of the band. In the current day, Matt is an eccentric figure with an online career of Twitch streaming and has a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Trivium would be a major figure in the metal scene that I grew up with, which I'm pretty sure counts as classic rock at this point, which has really forced me to face my own mortality as well as take into account precisely how little I've accomplished in the same time span. Fuck. Is Metallica without Lars Ulrich really the Metallica we wanted to have? Well, it was for the late bass legend and early thrash pioneer Cliff Burton. At least, that's according to fellow Big Four bestie, Anthrax guitarist Scott Ian. In a 2014 interview, Ian would claim that Burton intended to replace the Danish Metallica founder once the band was finished with their Master of Puppets tour. A tour that would unfortunately precede the bassist's tragic passing. It's well known that Burton was close with Ian, Benante, and others, and the claim would go on to be a well-circulated rumor. When asked about it in a later interview, guitarist Kirk Hammett confirmed the validity of the rumor, but cautioned that it was likely not as serious as it may have looked. He expressed that they may have grumbled something as they were unhappy at certain points in their career, and it may have morphed into a more serious situation through a game of telephone. Lars's love of metal and business-savvy mind were essential to where Metallica ended up, and we're left to wonder what the band would look like without him. Lars Ulrich was right about Napster, was essential to Metallica's success at every stage of their career, and fits perfectly with James Hetfield and the rest of the band as a drummer. It's almost an objective fact that Metallica are heavy metal's biggest champion, especially by metrics of mainstream perception. And with that comes major adoration and hatred for both the band as an entity and its members, particularly drummer Lars Ulrich. From Lars's connection to Brian Slagel leading to a spot on the Freshman Metal Massacre compilation before he even had a band, to the endless hours in the studio alongside James Hetfield directing and constructing some of metal's biggest hits, to the big business decisions that turn Metallica into a corporate juggernaut. For better or worse, Lars deserves every bit of credit and respect, and more. Love him or hate him, a lot of major metal history lays at the feet of the Danish drummer, and while his sound, personality, or ideas can be unpopular at times, altogether he's earned every bit of what he has. Corrosion of Conformity emerged from the American South in 1982, giving them a tenure in history that rivals any of heavy metal's biggest hitters from the decade. Their roster of prolific artists was a bit of a revolving door, resulting in the band's inability to lock down exactly what they wanted their identity to be. But the fruits of their labor would take more than a decade to bear, with the inclusion of Pepper Keenan leading to widespread success, and outside of a 6-year break away from the band, bassist and founder Mike Dean has been there for the lion's share of COC's elaborate history. From 1993 to just this past week, Dean has been a pillar of COC's heart and soul, and he's once again announced his departure from the heavy metal megalith. After the loss of co-founder Reed Mullen, Dean has found it difficult to connect and collaborate with the scattered roster of musicians, and he intends to put together another project right there in the band's home of Raleigh, North Carolina. A statement from the band expressed love and support for Dean as the two entities part to create new chapters in a history that rivals heavy metal's best. Years ago, Power Trip's 2017 banger Nightmare Logic would hit my ears, and in a rare occurrence for yours truly, absolutely hooked me. I was instantly blown back by the powerful vocals of Riley Gale and the truly awesome riffage reminiscent of heavy metal's heyday. In 2020, as the entire world was thrown into chaos, Gale tragically and unexpectedly passed away, leaving a major crack in the Texan outfit's foundation. Since then, the surviving members of Power Trip have worked to rebuild that foundation, facing a public backlash as well as banging heads with the Gale family, but they've recently announced a formal return to domination. Many fans are excited and supportive, while others are quite upset that Pantera, particularly with the inclusion of Phil Anselmo, is the base from which they've chosen to launch. After Anselmo's public gaffe a few years ago, I'm not elaborating, and Gale's open political allegiances, detractors feel entitled to set the band on fire, though I doubt it'll slow anything down. Lemmy Kilmister is a legend, and it's been far too long since I've talked about him. The natives are getting restless. In a 2011 interview with Bass Player magazine, Lemmy exclaimed that he was influenced heavily by acts like The Who and the Beatles, and later on even Kurt Cobain. When asked about any dream collaborations, he names the late Nirvana frontman as well as John Lennon and Paul McCartney, and even expressed interest in teaming up with Evanescence's Amy Lee. He expounded on his signature love of Rickenbacker basses and the history behind his iconic Marshall amplifier setup, lovingly named Murder One. It's a random collection of questions and answers that give an awesome look into the mind of one of rock music's greatest, and even though he ends the interview with a dismal outlook of rock and roll's future, which in the modern day is still an understandable concern, his humble nature and eccentric personality is easily observable even in a text format. What? Jane's Addiction would be vocalist Perry Farrell's magnum opus, forming in the mid-1980s and releasing their first studio record toward the end of the decade. And while I can't say that I'm a fan, I do remember them being somewhat active while I was in high school. They released a mere 4 albums between 1988 and 2011, signaling a rocky and tumultuous history, and if their recent reunion shows are any indication, things are still flaring up for the aging rock album. At a show in Boston, tension was reportedly brewing all night between Farrell and the other members of the band, coming to a fiery head as he went on to physically attack Navarro, body checking and throwing a punch at the guitarist. It would bring the show to a sudden and confusing stop, and while I'm sure clarification will be given in the coming days, it leaves fans of the band unsure about the remainder of their upcoming show.